Imagine being laughed at on a $200 million yacht. Mocked for your simple dress, treated like you did not belong. Now imagine the moment when silence falls, because everyone suddenly realizes that you are not a guest. You are the owner. Not just of that yacht, but of the entire fleet surrounding it. Engines roar. Lights blaze across the water, and the ocean itself seems to bow. What happens next leaves every arrogant face frozen in fear and awe. Stay with me. Because this story will shock you to the very end, the ocean glittered under the afternoon sun. A sleek white yacht, valued at $200 million. It's floated like a palace on the water. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter spilled across the deck. Sharp and mocking. A young woman in a plain linen dress stood near the rail. Her hair lifted by the sea breeze. The others eyed her with smirks, their designer clothes gleaming. Their jewels catching the light, they whispered loud enough for her to hear. Who let her in here? One man scoffed, sipping his drink. She looks like she belongs in the crew. Not among us, another sneered. Their laughter rose again. Cutting through the air, her hands rested calmly on the polished wood rail. She did not flinch. Though her chest tightened with the sting of humiliation, the scent of salt and perfume mingled in the air. Her ears burned from their taunts. Every sound magnified against the crash of waves. Her eyes drifted across the horizon, where more yachts, just as grand, shimmered in the sunlight. She breathed in slowly, steady and deliberate. The man with the loudest voice stepped closer, grinning at her like she was a spectacle. "This is a private gathering," he declared, his tone full of pride. "People like you do not get invitations to yachts like this." The laughter swelled again, echoing across the water like cruel music, but she only turned her gaze, calm and unshaken, toward the waiting fleet that surrounded them. Every vessel glistened. A silent army of wealth and power. The mocking grew louder, until one of the crew members approached and bowed low before her. The laughter broke like glass. "Madam," the crewman said, his voice steady but filled with respect, "would you like us to prepare your yacht for departure? Or shall we inform the captains of the entire fleet that you will remain here?" Silence fell heavy over the deck. The sea breeze stilled, as if the world itself held its breath. The woman lifted her eyes, her calmness cutting deeper than any raised voice. The mocking faces froze, mouths half open, eyes wide with sudden realization. The fleet was hers. The ocean itself seemed to bend to her presence. Asterisk. One woman's glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the deck. The sharp crack rang out like a warning. Nobody moved to pick it up. Eyes darted between the elegant yachts lined across the water, each one waiting in silence. Engines hummed faintly, like beasts ready to move at her command. The linen dress that had drawn ridicule now looked like a crown. Simple, untouched by pretense, more powerful than any glittering gown. Her fingers tapped lightly on the rail, steady and controlled. The sound was louder than the heartbeat pounding in the chests of those around her. She did not speak immediately. She allowed the weight of silence to spread, pressing on every smug face that only moments before had mocked her. The sea air carried the faint creak of ropes, the groan of steel, the whisper of money that belonged only to her. Finally, she turned, her eyes locking with the man who had taunted her first. His smirk had collapsed into something pale and hollow. Her voice was soft, yet it cut through the deck like a blade. "You stand on my deck and you laugh." The man swallowed hard, his throat dry in the sudden heat of shame. Around them, the crowd shifted uneasily, their confidence draining into the wood beneath their expensive shoes. Some tried to smile as if pretending they had known all along, but their eyes betrayed them. Fear lingered there, mixed with awe. The waves crashed harder against the hull, as though the sea itself roared in her defense. She turned back toward the horizon, where her empire floated, vast and undeniable. The truth hung heavy in the air, and no one dared to breathe too loudly. The sun dipped lower, painting the water in molten gold. Her shadow stretched long across the deck, commanding more presence than any jeweled necklace or tailored suit. Crew members stood straighter now, their respect unquestionable. Every eye followed her, but none dared to meet her gaze for long. The man who had mocked her most took a trembling step back. His confidence had drained away like spilled wine over the edge of the yacht. The woman in the linen dress did not chase him with words. She let silence speak. Heavy and merciless, the others shifted, clutching their glasses with nervous fingers. The clinking of ice sounded louder than thunder in the quiet. She finally moved, slow and deliberate, walking toward the center of the deck. The teakwood beneath her feet seemed to bow to her with every step. A waiter rushed forward. Hands shaking, offering her champagne, she lifted the glass with grace, her expression unreadable. Her eyes swept across the gathering, catching each face in turn. Nobody laughed now. The sea breeze carried only unease and the faint echo of their earlier cruelty. When she spoke again, her words carried the weight of a storm. You judged me by a dress. But the ocean does not care for fabric. It bends only to ownership. A murmur rippled through the guests, unease spreading like wildfire. The engines of the surrounding yachts rumbled louder. Vibrating through the deck, one by one, their lights flickered on, casting a glow that crowned her in brilliance. The night was hers, and they all knew it. Asterisk. The glow from the fleet spread across the water, each yacht illuminated like a floating cathedral. Reflections shimmered in the waves, creating a halo around her. Gasps escaped from the guests, hushed but sharp. They clung to their glasses as if crystal could anchor them from the truth rising before their eyes. She raised her champagne slightly, not in toast, but in command. The nearest yacht answered, its horn booming across the bay. The sound was deep, resonant, a declaration of power. Other vessels followed, one after another, until the air shook with thunder. The fleet announced her presence to the world. Some of the guests flinched at the sound, their nerves unraveling. The man who had mocked her most pressed a hand against his chest, his face pale as marble. No apology left his lips, no excuse could survive under the weight of her ownership. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer, cool and unyielding. Then she looked past him, to the endless horizon that belonged to her. Salt kissed the air, sharp and clean. The sea seemed to bow, its restless surface reflecting her dominion. Her voice carried once more, steady and final. This fleet does not follow those who laugh at shadows. It follows me. The guests stood frozen, their world tilting with every word she spoke, and in the silence that followed, the ocean itself seemed to wait for her next command. Asterisk, the sky deepened into indigo, stars piercing through the fading light. Lanterns along the deck flickered to life, their glow soft against the tension that gripped the crowd. Every guest stood still, unsure whether to bow or flee. Her calm gaze swept over them, each face exposed in the golden light. Jeweled necklaces suddenly felt heavy. Tailored suits felt like costumes. Their wealth, once flaunted like armor, shrank beneath the immensity of hers. The sea rocked the yacht gently. As if cradling its true master, she lowered her glass, untouched. Placing it on the nearest table, the crystal clinked softly, the sound echoing like a closing door. Then she stepped closer to the group, her linen dress whispering with each movement. No jewels, no crown. Only the weight of truth wrapped around her like silk. One woman forced a brittle smile, her voice trembling. We had no idea. The words dissolved into the night, weak and meaningless. Her silence answered louder than any speech. From the dark water came the hum of approaching tenders, sleek and fast, gliding toward the yacht. Uniformed crew waited within them, eyes sharp, movements precise. The fleet was alive, each vessel poised as if waiting for her single gesture. Guests shifted uneasy, their arrogance fully stripped away. The young woman lifted her chin slightly, the sea wind tugging at her hair. Her command did not need to be spoken. Every soul on that deck already understood who ruled the waters beneath their feet. The tenders drew closer, their engines a low growl beneath the rhythm of the waves. Spotlights swept briefly across the water, catching faces pale with unease. A hush spread across the deck, thick and suffocating. The young woman did not move, yet every eye stayed locked on her. She was gravity itself, holding them in place. The tenders reached the yacht. Docking with crisp precision, crew members stepped out, their uniforms immaculate, their posture sharp with discipline. They saluted her in unison, a gesture not of employment, but of loyalty. The guests gasped, some shrinking back as if the air had grown too heavy to breathe. One man dropped his glass, the wine staining the deck like spilled blood. The sharp scent of alcohol mingled with salt and steel. She finally spoke, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the vessel. "Those who laugh at me forget that I do not stand alone. I never stand alone." Her words struck harder than any storm. The crew waited silently, their presence a wall of power behind her. The guests glanced nervously at one another, their bravado gone. The night seemed to lean closer, listening, waiting for what she would say next. And in that charged silence, even the ocean held still. Her eyes lingered on the horizon. Where her fleet gleamed like a crown upon the sea, each yacht stood like a sentinel, unwavering, a fortress of light in the deepening night. The guests shifted uneasily, her shoes clicking against the tick as though trying to break the silence. No one dared to speak. Her presence pressed against them, heavier than the ocean that surrounded them. The woman in linen finally turned, her face calm, her eyes sharp as cut glass. She stepped closer to the gathering. The crowd instinctively parted. The smell of salt water followed her, fresh and fierce. Her voice came again, steady and unhurried. "Respect is not bought by fabric or jewels. It is commanded." The words struck the deck harder than the waves outside. A woman in diamonds lowered her head, shame burning across her cheeks. The man who had mocked her most tried to force a grin, but it faltered under her gaze. Her footsteps echoed as she moved toward the rail once more. From below, the hum of engines swelled, the fleet alive with energy, waiting. The guests could feel it now. Her empire was not made of gold alone, but of obedience, loyalty, and fear. The sea breeze whipped stronger, as if nature itself bowed to her dominion. She raised one hand, the simplest of gestures. Instantly the fleet responded. Engines roared, horns blared, and the water trembled beneath the weight of her power. The night belonged to her, and every soul on that yacht knew it. The horns rolled across the bay like thunder, rattling glasses and shaking nerves. Guests clutched the rails, their laughter from earlier now, a distant memory swallowed by fear. Lights from the surrounding yachts shimmered on the waves, forming a halo around the vessel. It looked less like a party and more like a coronation. Her linen dress fluttered in the rising wind, yet she stood unmoved, a pillar against the storm. Crew members bowed their heads slightly, their silence an oath. The man who had mocked her most could no longer meet her gaze. Sweat traced down his temple. His arrogance dissolved like salt in the sea. She let the moment stretch, letting their shame steep into the wood of the deck. Every second without her words was heavier than speech. When she finally spoke, her tone was quiet, almost gentle. "You stand in my world. You breathe my air, float upon my waters." Her words seeped into them, each syllable undeniable. "The fleet answers to me, not to your laughter, not to your pride." The guests stared, unable to move, caught between awe and dread. The night itself seemed to hush, as if the stars bent closer to hear her, and still her fleet waited, the engines rumbling like chained beasts eager to be released. The water churned, as the yachts shifted in unison, their movements precise. Like soldiers awaiting a single command, reflections danced across the dark sea. Blades of light slicing through the waves, the guests clung to their stillness, unwilling to draw her attention. Her hand lowered slowly, and the fleet stilled, the roar fading to a controlled silence. Even the ocean seemed to obey her. Her gaze swept the crowd again, measuring each face, each tremor, each mask of false composure. A jeweled bracelet slipped from one woman's wrist and clattered to the deck. No one dared to bend and pick it up. The sound of it striking the wood was louder than the heartbeat in their ears. She rested her hand lightly on the rail, her voice carrying like wind over steel. "You thought I was nothing." The words sliced, cold and sharp. "You forgot that wealth is not shown, is commanded unseen until it must reveal itself." A shudder rippled through the group. Pride collapsing under the weight of truth. The sea air tasted different now, no longer sweet with luxury, but heavy with power. And in the silence that followed, every guest understood they had not merely mocked a woman, they had mocked the sovereign of the sea. Asterisk. The realization settled over them like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. No one laughed now, no one dared even to whisper. The hum of the fleet vibrated beneath their feet, steady and alive, as if the ocean itself carried her heartbeat. Her eyes lingered on the horizon, the endless stretch of water that belonged to her alone. She breathed deeply, the salt air sharp in her lungs, the night wind cool against her skin. When she turned back, the guests instinctively stepped away, giving her space without being told. Their eyes dropped, unable to hold her gaze. The diamonds around their necks looked suddenly cheap. The tailored suits clung like costumes at a play they no longer wished to perform. Her linen dress, simple and flowing, now seemed like a robe of power. Her voice came again, it's quiet yet absolute. "The sea remembers. It remembers who owns it and who only borrows from it." The words slid into their minds, undeniable, impossible to shake. A murmur of the tide against the hull underscored her sentence, so the ocean itself agreed. The man who had taunted her most fell silent, his jaw tight, his pride drowned. The others stood frozen, breath shallow, waiting for what she would decide next. And above them, the stars burned brighter, casting their light on the woman who commanded both the night sky and the endless sea. Asterisk. The silence grew so complete that even the waves seemed hesitant to break it. Every guest stood rigid, her nerves stretched thin as wire. The scent of the ocean mixed with the faint sweetness of spilled wine drying on the deck. Her gaze lingered on the shattered glass near their feet, sharp fragments glinting like tiny mirrors of their shame. She stepped forward, her footsteps slow, deliberate, echoing across the wood. Each tap of her heel sounded like a verdict. The crew remained still, their discipline unbroken, their loyalty etched in silence. She paused at the center of the deck, the lantern light framing her as if the night itself was her stage. Her eyes lifted toward the fleet, each yacht glowing like a jewel in her crown. Engines idled in patience, a reminder of her command over them all. She lifted her chin, the sea breeze sweeping strands of hair across her face. Untamed, yet regal. Her voice came calm, resonant, without a trace of haste. "You sought to measure me by appearances. You will now measure yourselves by what you lack." Her words carried like stone into deep water. It's impossible to ignore, impossible to retrieve. The guests shifted, their once proud posture broken, their silence a confession. The horizon loomed, vast and endless, as though the ocean itself leaned closer to hear her next decree. Asterisk. The lantern light flickered against her face, casting shadows that sharpened her calm expression. No one dared to move. Even the air seemed reluctant to stir. Heavy with expectation, her eyes narrowed slightly, capturing each trembling figure before her. The man who had mocked her most lowered his head, his voice trapped in his throat. The jeweled woman clutched her necklace so tightly her knuckles turned. White dot every gesture. Every breath betrayed their unease. She let the weight of silence linger until it pressed against their chests. Then she spoke again, her tone steady and unyielding. "You believed this deck gave you power, but it belongs to me. You stand only because I allow it." The words struck harder than any shout. The guests flinched, shame tightening around them like chains. A gull cried overhead, the only sound daring to pierce the silence. The fleet answered with a low rumble, engines vibrating through the water as though echoing her authority. She turned her gaze back to the horizon, her empire gleaming beneath the stars. The guests followed her stare, and in that moment they understood they were not standing on a yacht. They were standing in her kingdom. The night had grown still, the stars burning brighter against the velvet sky. The fleet remained in quiet formation, their lights reflecting like constellations across the restless sea. On the deck, the guests stood subdued. Their earlier arrogance dissolved into silence. The woman in the linen dress rested her hand on the rail, her expression calm, almost serene. She no longer needed to remind them who she was. The ocean had spoken for her. She turned, her gaze sweeping once more over the uneasy faces. But this time, there was no sharpness in her eyes. Only a quiet certainty. "Power is not in the laughter of thee, crowd," she said softly. "It is in the silence that follows when truth reveals itself." Her words settled into the night. Carried away on the salt wind, the guests lowered their heads. Humbled beneath the weight of her presence, she stepped away from the gathering. Moving toward the far end of the deck, the crew parted for her with reverence, their loyalty unspoken but absolute. From the horizon, the sound of waves rose steady and eternal. The sea stretched wide and endless, hers to command, hers to keep. She lifted her eyes to the stars, their reflection shimmering across the water, and as the fleet stood in perfect stillness around her, the night closed like a curtain on a stage. The story was no longer theirs. It was hers,